Hi guys, Ryu here, and in this video we're gonna be talking about what is a good image. It's quite a complicated subject and really difficult to explain, so I hope I'm gonna do a good job. Now, there are many factors that come together to create a good image, and these are the ones I think the most important ones. Yeah. So it's balance, story, engagement, visual impact, composition, lighting, how all the rules have been broken, eye guidance and capture attention. Then we have factors that help you to create better images. From left to right, warm to cold, blurred to sharp, high contrast versus blend, humans, faces, scale, clipping, ratio, breathing space, angles and doves. So there's a lot to talk about, so let's get on with it. Now, balance. This is really essential, yeah? The way to understand well-composed image and balanced image, okay, is to understand the weight of objects, lights, shadows, how they all counterweight themselves. So if you think that colors and shadows and highlights and objects in general are, they have weight to them, you can balance your image based on that. And quite frankly, when I'm editing an image, when I'm composing an image, I don't really think about it. I'm just feeling it. But it's a skill that's been developed throughout the years of practicing it. I mean, I've been practicing art for over 20 years. And most of the time I've been practicing abstract art, which is Chinese and Japanese calligraphy, where you actually have to see the composition and balance before you write anything, and writing takes seconds and cannot be fixed. So you need to come up with an impeccable balance, within seconds, and make sure that everything is perfect, right? So let's grab one of the examples, and I'll try to tell you how interesting balance in calligraphy really is. So let's grab one of the examples, right? And if you look at this image, disregarding the background, right, which actually is balanced as well, if you try to look at the agility and sort of a composition of the line, you'll start seeing that it's a very solid and well-grounded composition, as in the line, the way it's been led. It's, by the way, a one-stroke character, right? Well, two, because the dot is separate. You can see that, it will not topple over, it will not fall. It's just well-balanced and well-based. You have to see that before you start writing, so that's pretty tough, yeah? Going back to images, if you start analyzing what you have in an image, you start seeing how everything is balancing itself. For example, this ship is balanced by this item here. Okay, that's the first thing. This yellow rail here is balanced by this one. Okay. Lighting in this area, okay, is balanced by lighting in this area. This color will pull attention over here, but this rail will basically guide you back this way, all along the line, back to the ship. Okay. These lights here, okay, are basically balancing, okay, this edge, and they're gonna bring the attention and guide you all over the place here, okay, even including this bot here. It's barely visible, but it's still here, right? Especially with its circular, element. If there was no text here, you probably would see it much more clearly. Then you got top framing, which is very subtle, like these highlights here. They literally kind of frame the image and counterbalance this bright fog on the bottom, right? The top of the wing here is balanced by the light on the other side. And again, when I compose this, I don't think that way. I simply place items and I look at it and I can feel it if it's balanced, okay? So if you put something on your hand, let's say a sword or a stick, and you could feel that it's balanced on your hand. This is how I work, right? So, like for example, these dark elements are balanced by these darker elements on this side, etc., right? So there's a lot of stuff going on and there are a lot of elements to be taken into consideration. But there are certain rules, like for example, you could follow the rule of thirds of 30-70, which is quite similar. Split this image into sections, right? And you would notice that the main weight of the vessel is here on the left side, so it's off-centered, right? Then you got a really, really, really strong element of light here in the middle almost, right? Which is really powerful. But it's balanced by this brightness here, okay? And the brightness over here. So this is a triangle, right? Because I knew I'm going to be adding text, these corners here are quite dark. Because I knew the text is going to be brighter, so I didn't want to pull attention. So you need to think ahead, right? And make sure that you know what you're going to be putting in that image. If you're going to be putting text, you need to make space. Right, so for example, if I go back to this image here, right, this wouldn't work without the text. So let me show you, right? I'm gonna download it, okay? This composition wouldn't be balanced without the text. So let's just drop it in here, right? So if I try to clear the text, okay, so I'm going to select these two and I'm gonna try to run this tool on it. Okay, so you see now that because the text is gone, right, the weight on this side, right, is just too light. Everything is a little bit left heavy. I don't know if you can see that, but there's just too much space in here, and it feels as everything is shifted to the left. But because we have this text, it's actually counterweighting the very heavy front, and is balanced by a thinner text in here. So you feel as if there is a lot more of weight in this side than here, right? You don't necessarily have to look at the volume of, I'm not talking about physical weight, I'm talking about visual weight, okay? So even though that this part is obviously heavier in terms of physical weight, if you remove the text visually, okay, this one is a bit heavier now, because there is an empty space in here, okay? You need to think in terms of visual weight. Then again, for example, in this image, you have stuff like lights, which guide you through the entire vessel from left to right. They're not placed, accidentally. There's also one more on the wing. They are meant to drag your eyes to all these points. They're very subtle, okay? But because the lights are very small and very warm, they will pull your attention immediately. There's also a massive contrast in here, about which we're gonna be talking in a minute. All right, so in essence, think about balancing an image in terms of weight. That's really important. When you look at, for example, stuff like portraiture, you might think to yourself that, well, this is clearly weight on the right side. Well, yeah, but that's the point. The point is to create a massive negative space to create a very intimate image that's going to corner the subject and give them a lot of breathing space, about which we're going to be talking in a second, okay? It doesn't matter what kind of image you take, is the same story, right? You see now these texts here, they're balanced, okay? They're balancing one another. Because this scope is angled down, I got more space in here and more space in here for the text. Text wouldn't work in here or here. It's just not enough space. You would choke the negative space. You need this breathing space around your object, right? But sometimes you can go really crazy with framing. Like, for example, here, this is very aggressive framing, this one, okay? It's really aggressive. It's very close, very tight. But that was the purpose, because sort of dusty planet where you would be formally, where we would be choking without any breathing gear, right? Which this framing emphasizes that, the hostility of the environment. So you can actually amplify the story by framing, right? See what I mean? This is also very aggressive framing, and it's slightly tilted as a Dutch angle. It's called Dutch angle. So the camera is slightly tilted to create even more aggressive look. So the wheels are on more or less the same plane, but everything is a little bit lifted, sort of tilted. It looks a bit more dynamic, right? This is a very wide angle shot to make it also more dynamic and aggressive. And this one is a deadpan front. Framing is also very important, right? But you see how this is balanced, yeah? It's moved to the left, and there is space for the text. It would work with a smaller text here, but it would not work. It would not work well without any text. Okay. Sometimes you can place things in the middle, right? For example, here this is a deadpan center, perfect symmetry, right? It works. But then when you go symmetrical, you really have to go symmetrical, okay? You need to watch all the highlights, okay? All of them. They need to be symmetrical. Otherwise, your image will not work, okay? So this is how you can balance your image as well. So symmetry is allowed, but when you go symmetrical, make sure you really are, symmetrical, okay? Sometimes you want to leave a lot of negative space because you want to drop some text, right? And that creates perfect balance. Even sort of matches the face outline, if you know what I mean, right? So all these elements are very important. And let's talk about story. I mean, story and engagement. This is kind of all these things are kind of connected, okay? So story, engagement, visual impact, composition, lighting, right? Like I showed you on this example of this truck, right? If you want to sell a story, you can use framing, lighting, all these elements to support what you're trying to say. For example, in this image here, this is a very tight render, very tall render, kind of like a cinematic poster render of a bot, right? And it's a very low angle to make him look kind of intimidating, and also it's very confined. See, the framing is so tight because of the title of the movie. It's called Rogue. So it's an AI that was, kind of imprisoned by humans, so like, just obeying the will, and he went rogue. So he just cannot break out of its confinement, which is why the framing is so tight. Makes sense? And this one, on the other hand, is very spacious because it's an adventure of two bots roaming through some kind of a hostile planet, right? So it's, it's very relaxed and sort of, wide. You can emphasize, the mood in your photo, but for example, going very wide, like here, it's a very cinematic shot. It's 21:9. I really like this ratio, the very wide one, okay? And it's going to create more of an epic look, more cinematic. So if that's what you're going for, this kind of a format and framing will definitely assist you with this one, okay? So story is very important, and, you can tell a story in many ways. You can, for example, tell a story of some vessels exploring some planets, or maybe going to war, or maybe, relocating. This is some kind of a ship flying through some, I don't know, mega city, or some kind of a mothership, near some mothership, etc., right? This could be like a frame from a movie, right? Where some armed future sci-fi forces moving their vessels somewhere, right? In some kind of a city on the planet Earth. So you have kind of like a setting for your render, okay? It doesn't mean that you cannot, for example, create a very static render, which is going to be a studio render, like like this one. This is fine, but it also tells a story. It's a product, right? It's a product that you can buy or could buy. It's a robot made by some company and, by Show Labs, and it's on sale, okay? So it's also a story because it tells you what it is, right? So try to not just render what you made, but try to make it look appealing and interesting, and sort of give a viewer an idea what you're selling, okay? And I mean selling by sort of offering them to see. Now the engagement, how to build an engagement. Engagement is actually linked to these elements, okay? So let's talk about them, alright? So from left to right, warm to cold, blurred to sharp, high contrast to blend, right? What does it mean? It means that there are certain ways how humans perceive images, okay? We're gonna always enter a frame from left to right. It doesn't matter if you're Chinese or Japanese and you write from right to left, doesn't matter. It's just your eye's gonna go from left to right. So the key of a good image is to capture you and make you circle in the image forever, as long as possible. You see the way I arrange these two arms? It's created in a way to capture you and hold you in this image as long as possible, because you're gonna be circling around. You've been led along these shapes all the way around, right? Then you got these two on the corners, and this thing in the middle. You're gonna be circling in here forever, right? And that's the whole point, okay? It's up to you to create this kind of a feeling, alright? Same here, you're gonna be led through the human figures all the way up here, and around this truck. Okay, it doesn't matter how you look at it, it's the same situation. Okay, this is a good composition when you lead to the subject, and then you let people explore, find the human figure, and go back, and you circle. Okay, so engagement, you want to engage people in your image. You want to bring them in and keep them here. So they're gonna enter from left to right. They're gonna go from places of contrast to places of no contrast. So for example, contrasty places are like here, these windows, right? Under here, the truck. So all these lines, they're gonna lead you around the truck, and these are more blunt places, which is why I made them more hazy and less defined. So I didn't want them to compete with the main subject, which is also why the main subject is more sharp and more focused. Okay, it's all on purpose. All right. So this would be from left to right, and from blur to sharp, and high contrast to blend, warm to cold. This is important. Remember when we were talking about this vessel here, when I told you that I created these lights to guide you? That's exactly what it is. You can create exceptionally small details. This is why I suggest, guys, do not use massive lights in your composition, especially when they're warm, right? Because they're gonna be a huge magnet pulling attention, right? You want them small, because when they're too big, they're gonna be too vulgar, too aggressive, okay, too focusing, and you're gonna get stuck there, right? So you need to weight your lights accordingly to their warmth, because people will go always first to the places of warmth. I have this interesting example here of architecture. It's a picture I took of Tokyo some time ago, and I edited it in a very special way, okay? So you see, this is an interesting image. If you look at it, you can see how warm the front is and how cyan the back is. It just creates an illusion of greater depth, okay? And also, it creates kind of like a reference background for you, but you're not being drawn immediately to the back. You're being drawn immediately here, because I want you to see the highway, and then I want you to see this one and lead you into the image, right? So you can control where people look with colors, right? And you have a very strong light here that's gonna kind of lead you up, okay, and then around here and down, all along these lights here, right? So this is all very strategically placed, okay? So use colors to build engagement and balance. Like I said, these are all connected, so it's very difficult to talk, about them without talking about others. Yeah. So these are all connected, so it's extremely hard to talk about one without talking about the others. Okay. So you're gonna go from left to right, warm to cold, blur to sharp, which is why sometimes we create images that have a very strong depth of field and very strong, focus and fall off. Like here, I want you to focus on the head, but this arm here, it outweights this very heavy front, right? So you're gonna be drawn in here, but then immediately go back here. So you're not gonna get stuck in here. You're gonna be circling the image, right? Which is why this image was shot at this angle, okay? Lighting, we talked about lighting. Lighting is essential, because think about it. If there is no light, there is no composition, right? There's nothing. You see darkness. So lighting is everything, because lighting will define the shadows and highlights. You need to pay attention to what kind of environment you're working with. I was watching a very good video a long time ago, and it was about shooting people. As someone said, if I was shooting someone who has a dark skin, they would be focusing on highlights. But if I was shooting someone with a white skin, I would be focusing on shadows. And it's an interesting notion. So when you're composing something that's been shot at night, you want to focus on lights, how lightings are arranged, because they are going to be the most, the things are going to be pulling the most attention, right? However, when you're shooting something during daylight, okay, you want to focus on the shadows, because that's what's important. Shadows will define the features of whatever you're shooting. So even if you have a very complex composition, you want to frame it with shadows, right? Here and here, okay? These are echoing shadows, right? Framing. And you got this, main element in here, this juxtaposition of modern and old Japan, right? constantly developing. It's a really cool picture. Think about composing with shadows and think about composing with lights and assign weight to both. Okay, it's important to balance them. So you have to feel it, start thinking, how many shadows I have, how much of a shadow I have on the one side, how much of a shadow I have on the other side, right? This is important, how well the rules have been broken. So we got, rules of thirds and all this stuff, but then really good photography comes from breaking these rules, okay? So for example, if I go to my portraiture, like I said, this is probably my favorite example, but you can have a lot of them. For instance, here, it's supposed to be a perfect symmetry, but it isn't, right? So the rule is broken. Now, why is it broken? Because you could speculate that everyone has second nature, maybe like some kind of a slightly hidden and secretive nature, right? Something that they're shy to show, and this will be the shadowy side. So you got the two sides of a person, right? Which is quite interesting. But the picture is a dead center. It's like dead symmetry, right? But the lighting and weight isn't. But you could argue that the lighting here is off-weighted by the shadow in here, which is a paradox, but it works. So you can break the rules if you really know the rules, okay? And make the images much more, interesting, right? Like I said, this is my favorite image. I think one of my most favorite images, and this is a really good example. You have dark, bright, bright, dark. So you have a perfect balance, yet you have this offset. But this negative space is so powerful that it perfectly balances this calm face expression, right? So this is a rule being broken. And this also brings us to a subject of breathing space. I'm not going in order, but it doesn't matter. Breathing space. This is breathing space, guys. I see this issue a lot, okay? When people shoot something and they just don't give things enough of breathing space. Like, for example, you really want to... So imagine this is a face, okay? This, this device here on the top, okay? Because you can relate to it as a face, right? It's a face of an object, right? So let's say if this is a face... This is its breathing space. You need to leave it a breathing space, okay? So I would never, put it so close to the frame like this. This will be just... See, if that was a frame, let's say, right, a vertical one, this will be a really bad composition, okay? If you want a good composition, you should do it like this, okay? Even if it means to cut the frame. Cutting the frame is fine. This is essential, okay? This breathing space is essential. Not important, it's essential, right? I see this issue a lot, okay? So when you look at any of my portraits, and I suggest you look at good portraits, look at the breathing space. Every single one of them has a breathing space, right? Every single one of them, okay? There's always a breathing space. I like massive breathing space because I like to give, people some kind of a room for thought. See, that's a beautiful breathing space, yeah? These lights leading to the face and all around. You got this dreamy, very blurred, it's a good example of blurred, very noisy and negative space, right? So all these images have a massive breathing space, every single one of them. This wouldn't work if the frame ended here, it would look retarded. As someone who's looking in a wall, having a penalty or something. Don't do that, guys. Give it a lot of breathing space, right? Then let's go back here. Let me see. Eye guidance and captured attention. We talk about this. It's kind of similar to engagement, okay? So, like I said, you need to guide your eyes through the image, The eye is going to be guided around here. They're going to be guided up to the face, all around this highlight, and then back here. And you're gonna circle in this image because this kind of a outline of the sea, because that's what it is. There was a sea. On the seaside, it's kind of mirroring his face, right? And you can guide your eyes through the image, through various ways. For example, here you see there's a dialogue between the lines, the diagonal lines, between this window pane, because it's also a Dutch angle, right? And her neck going down through the spine, right? This is a very dynamic composition, but you can see how calm the expression is, and that's the dynamism of these lines outweighs calmness of her expression. So this is a very high contrast between dynamic and static, or very calm, and neutralizes itself, which is why this picture is so soothing to look at and thoughtful, despite these diagonals, very aggressive, very dynamic lines, right? So you've been guided to her face because she's framed by these two lines. There's a line in here and line in here. She's literally framed, and there's a double breathing space. A very powerful composition, right? And then you got this all beautiful negative space around her to frame this soft line of the face and hair, right? This is all done on purpose. Nothing is accidental, okay? So you need to compose your images very carefully. Then humans, that's important. Let's talk about humans. So let's go back to the example of, of this ship. These humans are essential because what they're gonna do, first of all, you're gonna look at them immediately. Okay, immediately, because we're drawn to human figures. If you look in a picture of someone, you're gonna be drawn immediately to the eyes, immediately, like this one. Okay, see this eye is a little bit fuzzy, but this one is sharp. So if the eye closer to the camera is fuzzier, it's not gonna work. There's a very good example on Hotmail website, which is I think Microsoft, right? So when you go here, it's a classic error of a photographer. You see that this eye is sharp and this one is blurred? This is fucked up. I can't believe someone actually approved this shit. That is one of the worst portraits I've ever seen. So this eye should be sharp and this one should be blurred because this one is closer to the camera. But because we're drawn immediately to the eyes, we can feel that there's something wrong with this image immediately, okay? The same here, you're drawn to the humans. So if the human, for example, body language is going to be incorrect, you will know. Which is why shooting, for example, images like this one is extremely difficult because you're working only with the body. You need the perfect body language for it to work, okay? And it takes really a lot of practice. And you have to also learn this body language with the static objects. Each of these is body language because the way they present themselves in a camera in this specific orientation, it will present a silhouette, and this silhouette is a body language. But with humans, it's a bit more difficult because they move, right? So not every frame is going to be perfect. So you need to capture them in a perfect frame. But since we're drawn to humans, we're going to immediately recognize that something is wrong with them. So you need to make sure that your humans are placed correctly, scaled correctly, and look correctly. Yeah, but you can use them as anchor, visual anchor to pull around the image, which is why I use these guys. Second thing, they're going to introduce is scale, which is really important, okay? Because without these guys, you will have no clue how big is this vessel. Is it big? Is it huge? Is it small? Is it tiny? Is it a toy? What is it, right? You do have a cargo here, but, this could be a battery, right? But because of these guys, you immediately know that this vessel is pretty big, right? It's not a typical fighter. It's something like maybe a bigger fighter, or maybe some kind of a cargo carrier, or whatever the hell. But or maybe some kind of a commercial jet with a lot of space in it. Yeah, but or research vessel, whatever. But this gives you immediate reference to the scale of everything, right? So using humans, like here, you have no clue how big is this, right? But here you know immediately how big this is. The same with a truck. Remember this truck example? I mean, you know how big this thing is immediately, right? Without these people, you would think like, what the hell are these windows for? Is it for people? Is it a toy? What is it, right? So that's essential. Then ratio. We're gonna talk about clipping in a second. Ratio. Now, ratio is something I mentioned before, right? Is when you go really wide, it's gonna look cinematic and relaxed. When you go vertical, you're gonna go very dynamic. I see a lot of errors with framing, okay, and incorrect framing because framing is way too vertical for example, what you want to shoot. Like a vertical framing in this case wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work because mountains are horizontal, desert is horizontal, and the buildings are horizontal, and this one is going in a horizontal direction, okay? If you want a really good vertical, orientation, for example, I should show you a good example, right? This is a perfect example of a very good vertical orientation, right? That's where you want to go vertical because everything is vertical. You want to emphasize the nature of these lines. Boom, boom, boom. People are vertical. Everything is vertical. And because of the compression, very long lens, so it's like 200 mil, it looks incredibly congested, and this is exactly the feeling I was going for. So you see, I'm selling a story of a very busy Tokyo, right? Very crowded, very congested. You can't rest. So the framing, the focal length emphasizes the story and pushes what I want to say much further. So story, balance, you see, it's all connected. Yeah. A horizontal photo wouldn't work here, but this one, vertical, wouldn't work. You see what I mean? It just wouldn't work because it's too many horizontal lines. So don't create vertical renders where vertical renders will make no sense, okay? Right? Most of my renders, if not everything, is horizontal. But sometimes, you know, you could argue that you could create, for example, a vertical render of this one, right? You could. You know, it's possible, like this, see? That would work. But most of the time, I'm going for horizontal renders because they just simply are more cinematic, and that's what I like. I like cinematic look, okay? That's what I'm going for. That's my thing, all right? So now that's ratio, right? Breathing space, we talk angles and depth of field. Well, like I said, this is really important, okay? Angles, like for example, you see here, I shot it from a lower angle, okay? It just emphasizes the cinematic look of it. It's just, here's from a top angle, see, it looks a bit more docile. So when you're gonna shoot people from the top, you're gonna make them look more endearing. When you're gonna shoot people from the bottom, you're gonna make them look more powerful, okay? This is an example I shot from a higher angle. You see, she looks more soft and endearing and feminine because it's shot from a taller angle, higher angle, right? But when you shoot, for example, guys, you want to shoot them either straight on or from a lower angle to empower them. If you look at, for example, CEO photos, you will see that clearly. And the same thing applies to 3D. It's the same thing, it's just the image. Look, this is shot from a taller angle and makes this, you know, makes this ship look a little bit smaller. But for example, this one, you know, is shot from a lower angle and makes it look more cinematic. Right? You see that? So kind of more empowering. Same here, shot from a lower angle to make it look tall and massive, right? Okay. Here, shoot from the floor, lower angle, shoot up, because I'm shooting from a level of the axis. I'm shooting up to make it look more powerful, right? So, you know, make sure you know how to operate with your angles. Yeah, this is really important. Okay. So angles and depth of field. Use it well, guys. Depth of field is a tool. It's not supposed to make look things just cool, okay? This is not how you use depth of field. Depth of field needs to have a purpose, okay? Everything in life, and depth of field included, needs to have a purpose. This is a very good example of properly used depth of field, okay? This. You got these two ships, this one's already out of focus, and that's correct. And this is, you know, the city is a background, it doesn't matter. This is a correct use of depth of focus, okay? So tell a story with it, but when you don't need to use it, don't use it. It's a tool, okay? It's a tool that's gonna help you to bring focus to whatever you're shooting, whatever you wanna say, this is my main object, and the rest is framing, okay? That's how you use depth of field, okay? Now let's talk about clipping, it's the last thing, okay? Clipping is important. When you go to Photoshop, okay, you'll see something called histogram, right? This histogram will show you dark tones on the left and dark tones on the left and bright tones on the right. Anytime this histogram gonna reach one of these sides, it's bad, okay? It means you clipped, which means you basically overexpose your image. So don't let it go either way. If you're gonna go here, right, you will see that it's gonna get clipped here, and you're gonna see that you're gonna have red indications of stuff being clipped. Stuff that's clipped doesn't have any detail, which means it's pure white or pure black. Okay, this is a bad idea, right? So you never want to clip one of these histograms to either left wall or right wall. Okay, you don't want to do, you know, stuff like this, all right? Because that's clipped. You see, now it's showing that's clipped. All these blue things, okay, there's zero detail. Okay, so even though, all right, my shadows are really dark, they're not pure black. That's the point. They're not pure black. Because when you print an image and anything is pure black, you will see no details. All right, you can't see it that well on a digital image. but that's what it is. You can use it for artistic purposes, but you know, be aware of it, that this is really important, and clipping is a thing, okay? So be careful with your lighting, especially on the reflective surfaces. Okay, you need to be careful with lighting on reflective surfaces, all right? Sometimes you need to dim it down in Photoshop, all right? Now, regarding the elements of a good image, I forgot to mention one important thing, and it's quite often overlooked, and it's cropping. And by cropping, I mean cutting out pieces of your model in a way to frame it deeper, okay? And what you can achieve by doing that is create a bit more intimate and 3D look, closer look. It just makes things appear a bit more powerful. Also, it works really well with a very high focal length, you know, 150, 200, 300, etc., right? Because you can go really close on the subject, right? So cropping is an art, and it's really difficult because you need to not only weight the entire image in your frame, but also you need to be able to, you know, crop it in a way that it's still pleasing to look at, okay? This is not an easy thing to do, but you can practice. Now, the recent release for Ultimate Guide to Hardtops and Box Cutter course was the ship course for the ship, and this one is cropped in every single image for the simple reason of it having, you know, massive wingspan vertically, okay, not horizontally but vertically. So it's difficult to shoot it properly. But you see, this is an exceptional. This model looks really very good from any angle. So the only way that you can mess up the way it looks is by bad cropping, okay? So if you have this course, I highly recommend you just go ahead and, you know, practice with it. And if you don't, you can still grab it. It's a fantastic course, and it contains, you know, very valuable information regarding Hardtops and Box Cutter. And, you know, we'll teach you how to create this ship as well. So over 60 videos in that course. So anyway, this, you know, this is probably one of the best examples of cropping I have in my, you know, portfolio in terms of, you know, sci-fi cropping, right? But I use it quite commonly in portraits. So if I go to my portfolio, you'll see that cropping is really, really something I use very heavily. This basically makes subject appear very close to camera. Every single portrait headshot, right, I have is cropped. And it's really a matter of millimeters sometimes when you're gonna crop too deep and it's gonna look bad, okay? If I crop this just a little bit higher here, it would not work, okay? Because you need to leave enough of room on the forehead and eyes, enough of room below the chin to give a bit of a breathing space. So cropping is really tough to do, especially when you want to do it, you know, in camera. But if you look at my portraits, every single one of them is cropped, okay? All these close-ups are cropped, okay? So practice it, because it's a really good skill to have. And, you know, just study portraiture and you'll see how the images are being cropped. Study the ratio, you know, of these crops, etc., okay? And then try to apply it to your sci-fi. So now I just wanted to mention it. It's a very powerful way of framing, because you see that this looks okay, right? But, you know, this looks way more powerful because you're closer to the subject, right? You can see more details. You can create very cinematic sort of shots, which is quite interesting, right? You see, like, this is a whole silhouette, right? It doesn't look as powerful as here, right? Because it kind of dwarfs you. And if you look at this image, it's shot from a very low angle to make it appear more powerful, and also to expose and, you know, emphasize all these details, to show all the details underneath, right? So that was a very carefully chosen, not just a cropping, but also focal length and angle. Now there's another thing, that's lighting, but I think lighting we're gonna have to talk about in a separate video, because it's a very wide subject, very broad, and requires this, you know, separate video. So I think we talked about everything, guys, and you know, this is what I would recommend studying and paying attention to create a good image. I would highly recommend you guys watch some tutorials on photography or, you know, video making, and study how portraiture is done, because portraits are fantastic for, you know, learning how to shoot. Because if you think about this drone as, you know, having a face, it's a portrait. Everything is a portrait, okay? Everything I shoot is a portrait. I approach everything as a portrait, all right? Doesn't matter if it's, you know, has an eye in it or not. It's, for me, it's a portrait. Like, for example, this is a portrait of this vessel. This is a front, this is a back, so that's a face, right? Everything has a front, everything has a back, right? Doesn't matter what it is, it's a portrait, okay? This is a portrait, there's a face, there's a back. There's more breathing space here than here. See what I mean? So, shift your thinking to a different plane, and you're gonna be able to create better images. Alright guys, well, thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.